Let's take a look then at uh, the means by which, let's just take willpower out of intro. No, we're going to take two things. One is my woodsmanship. So I'm talking about using my axe, but also other tools that are involved with the proper use of, um, you know, natural resources. So let's say I want to build a windbreak so we can make it through the night, in this storm or this windy night. I'm going to build a windbreak so we aren't going to, be a little more protected as we sleep out here in the woods. And let's say I do that. You say something like, roll your relevant skill. I'm like, I'm on it because I'm pretty sure I knew what that skill was anyway. So we're together on that, and I roll it and I make it. What's the mechanic of it going up?
So as long as the task itself is not arduous, you automatically.
This one was arduous. It was nasty.
Oh, it is arduous.
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah. I mean, these are witch haunted woods. I mean.
Oh sure.
This branch is going to take my eye out just because bad luck is bad here.
That's right. So the general mechanic is you take your skill percentage and you subtract 5 from it, and then you're rolling percentage dice. But let me just say you're actually rolling D10, and so you have a range. Let's say between 45 and 55, and it's always versus the task that's ahead of you, which the GM decides. Right. So you're trying to set up a windbreak for yourself. You're trying to build a deep pitted fire in the midst of all this. And so the task gets harder and harder and harder. And so this is why I say there's only a wiggle room of randomness.
Right.
If you're, so the skill serves as the base. You roll. So I say the task difficulty number, or I don't even say what I don't say what the number is.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think you're trying to tell me how the task is resolved. I was interested in when the skill. How do we resolve whether the skill increases?
When the skill increases, it increases through persistent use and especially arduous use.
Well, let's say you're doing this arduous thing. I mean, is there a roll at the end of the session? Is there a number of times you check it? I mean, what is the actual way that it goes up?
For advancement, it would be that you roll. If you used a skill many times per session, you're putting a little tick mark next to your use, and then after the session, player and GM talks. Okay, I use this a lot in this circumstance. And I also do the principle of the lower the skill, the more quickly it advances.
No, I get that. And but you're saying that it's handled qualitatively based on the tick marks and
yes.
Because you're probably aware of the myriad of techniques at that exact point that are involved. So it's kind of fascinating. I mean, there is the method by which it goes up. You get tick marks every time you succeed, and then there's another game that said, "Wait a minute, no, you're going to get tick marks every time you fail."
Yeah.
And then, and in your case, do you do the tick marks no matter what, whether you just try it, right?
Every time you use it in a what I call a justifiable way.
Right. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
But the point is that success or failure doesn't really play a role in that. You just used it.
You just used it. Okay. That's right.
All right, so now I really understand that. Does willpower, in particular, go up similarly?
Willpower goes up slowly, and the way I have willpower is it is similar, but you're not actually tracking. I use my willpower because that's too low, right? Right. It's going to be over time. Your character forced yourself to do this and this and this when you really didn't want to. You succeeded in doing that, or you failed in doing that, and so you were haunted. Right. I handle that much less strictly.
It's interesting. The original RuneQuest had particularly unforgiving character creation. And if you didn't use the options in the back of the book, you were looking at some pretty rickety characters. And even with the options, you could easily find yourself with, I've often thought of the early RuneQuest as the game of the lame, the halts, the blind. And but the interesting thing is that your increase in charisma, which in that game was no joke, you needed a high charisma in order to become important, and to become recognized by the temple. To get any status, you had to have minima of charisma, and more depended on its use than one might think for a game of that era. So, but the way it went up was usually just bonuses. I mean, in RuneQuest was really mechanical in terms of every one of your skills going up. I mean, there was a roll to improve, and there was a strict set of things about it. Same thing for the attributes. You wanted your strength to go up, you're going to have to, use it, and all these things. You could also pay off. You could get a scroll, what's called a training scroll, that can make.
Oh, yeah.
And you could also buy training. So, but both of those are forms of treasure, stuff you have to go get, and that can help you up too. But charisma was unique. Charisma went up when the GM took a look at your character at the end of the session and said, you know what? You busted your ass on that. People are going to talk.
Oh,
1 to 3 charisma. I mean, so 3 is when you came back in triumph, right? And from everything. And, the huge heroic moment, you're going to go up 3 charisma. If you just, put in a really good try and people are going to talk about it, pop up a charisma. And in a system where the range of the attribute is 3 to 18 to start, roughly, +1 is no joke. +1 is actually a nice solid chunk, especially in the middle of the bell curve. So, anyways, so it sounds a little bit like that. Cool. The notion, therefore, that I have is what finally, it seems to me as though we need to look more at presentation of the game to people, getting them to buy in to the way it's played and what it's played about, and especially since it's off-brand for these things. And also, what is the nature, as I mentioned before, of your preparation for play, so that you feel like you're playing characters and not doing the tap dance. Those seem to me to be the big procedural, necessities of this. The process by which we make up our contributions to play. To take Circle of Hands as an example, one thing that I had been thinking about for a long time is the interplay of things that you roll for, things that you choose, things that you make up, which is different from choosing because there isn't anything to choose from. You just make it up, but you have to make it up. It goes right here. And things that you that you kind of have to know. So I'm not going to go through it step by step, but there is a sequence of what you roll, what you choose, what you make up, what you roll again, what you choose, and what you make up. It's a pretty strict sequence that you're supposed to follow. And some of it you're doing, some of it you're choosing, some of it you can't do anything about. And so it's handed to you based on what has happened. And it's very much on purpose. And one of the features that I noted in games of this kind was a weird snap-in effect, where the point was right when you said, I get it now. I get this character. That piece was coming in, that piece was coming down. I picked that piece on some basis. Now I know exactly what to say here. So that when a person has done this properly, writing that short key event at the end is usually extremely easy. They don't. If you said write your key event first, they'd struggle all over the place. They'd have no idea what you were talking about. But by this point, it all sort of snaps together, and you write this, and you are ready to go.
Hmm.
So the idea here is similar. I'm real interested in what a person does and what they're told and what they
Hmm.
carry out, so that at the end of this process they are oriented and motivated.
Hmm.
They have contributed to the fiction already by making up this character, and at some point in all of this, they got it. They got this person.
Hmm.
And even if that person is fairly vague to start, not that distinguished, just a guy, still they're ready to go. In some games, it's pretty much understood that you're not going to feel that way until you've been through a session or so. And that's okay too.
Hmm.
Um, but the question here is, how does that happen in your game? And that's something that I want to sort of put on our list,
Hmm.
right? Um, the other one that I keep harping on is when I say the witch up in the hills, what does that really mean? If I'm the game master, what does that really mean procedurally? What have I done? What have I written down? What have I held in abeyance for improvisational use later? What
Hmm.
are the mechanics available to me for the activity of the witch?
Hmm.
By the way, in this game, are there things that you are checking on in terms of the attempts of your NPCs, in terms of whether they do or don't achieve them?
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Okay.
I'm doing all kinds of primarily just brainstorming, like what information could possibly flow to them. Did it actually, like, let's say that there's four intermediary possibilities of what information could
Right.
seep back to the enemy,
Right.
and I have to check on each one of those. It is kind of neurotic. Yeah.
No, no, that's fine. The point is whether there's a procedure, and that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I like to point out is in my game Sorcerer is that often you will have characters trying to do stuff before someone else does, or even if the player doesn't know it, some other character is going there too.
Hmm.
I have them roll off. There are relevant attributes for this, and I have them roll off against each other, and now I know who gets there first. I
Hmm.
don't choose.
Right.
And I have found that most scene transitions in Sorcerer work very, very well if I pull back a little bit and say, okay, in the big picture, whose interests are served by getting here or doing this? And then I would say, for example, roll off with a player character, and if the player character wins, then what they are trying to do, they get to it first. Even if it's a
Hmm.
different thing, but it might matter a lot that the other person does or doesn't have that.
Right.
So, but what I've found is that therefore I already have means at my disposal right there in the mechanics without changing a single mechanic. I have means at my disposal for deciding what happens when,
Hmm.
because I don't decide.
Right.
And I'm not suggesting the same thing. What I am saying is that some sort of device of that kind is necessary in many cases, more so than people think, unless they want to maintain utter control.
Yeah, I wouldn't enjoy that, and my group would not
Right.
enjoy that.
And that's
Yeah.
very important though, because you can recognize that there are ideals of role playing which presuppose that that sort of control
Hmm.
is critical. What is
Hmm.
interesting is that your preferred aesthetic is sometimes utilized toward that end as a means of limiting what players can do. If I
Hmm.
completely handle everything they know, if I completely handle everything that they have coming to them, then their choices are limited and therefore more under my control.
Hmm.
Now, if you are playing in such a fashion so that your control is absence, but you are instead ready for anything, see the difference?
Hmm.
Readiness for whatever
Right.
and trust in your own system
Right.
to do it
Hmm.
is very different from control over everything,
Hmm.
even if there's a lot of improvisation in it.
Mhm.
right? And this is a big deal. People are always trying to talk about improv as narrative freedom. It's not.
Mhm.
That's not the issue. So, so now that you've explained this to me, I'm finding this to be rather an intriguing challenge that you've set for yourself. You want emergent fiction that is genuinely emergent, and that person will, when they look at their scarred and hardened character, they'll know it. They're like, yes, that is my scarred and
Mhm.
hardened character with 5 more, I don't know the units, but X more willpower than they had when they started. And damn
Mhm.
it, he earned every one of those. I can feel every one
Mhm.
of those in my bones.
That's
And
right.
that sense, I think, of but also of knowing that what happened was literally due to you honoring your own system and us playing with a goodwill toward this non-modern aesthetic or perspective as best as we
Mhm.
all can,
Mhm.
right? And sort of almost embracing the illogic of a certain amount of it, or
Mhm.
if you want to be romantic, surrendering to the metaphysic of it rather than the
Right.
analysis, if that's a
Right.
romantic way of looking at it.
Sure.
So
Sure.